Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Friday, September 5, 2025. First, in the suffocating silence of their captivity, Jocelyn and Vaughn began to question if they were approaching the final moments of their lives. The darkness seemed endless, broken only by their frantic thoughts and the lingering fear that they might never escape. They whispered prayers inside their minds, wondering if fate had abandoned them entirely. Each minute stretched like hours, and despair hung heavily over them as they contemplated whether they were on the brink of meeting their Creator. It was a moment of deep reckoning, when the fragility of human existence became undeniable, and the hope of freedom appeared only as a fading light at the edge of their consciousness. The terror of confinement pushed Jocelyn and Vaughn into states of raw panic. The air was heavy, the walls pressed in, and the fear of the unknown made every sound outside their cell unbearable. They clung to fleeting memories of life before their imprisonment, using them as fragile anchors against the madness that threatened to consume them. Their fear was not only of dying but of being forgotten, of disappearing without a trace. Yet even in this lowest of moments, their instincts for survival burned fiercely, forcing them to stay alert and ready for the slightest chance of escape. That chance came with the unexpected arrival of Britt. Against all odds, she appeared as their deliverer, breaking through the walls of despair and offering a lifeline. Her intervention was sudden yet decisive, and for Jocelyn and Vaughn, it felt as though destiny had sent her at the exact moment their strength was waning. With her help, they broke free of the prison that had stolen their sense of time and hope. The relief was indescribable, a tidal wave of gratitude and disbelief flooding their hearts as they followed Britt into the dangerous unknown of freedom. Freedom, however, came with new complexities. Jocelyn and Vaughn soon realized that Britt's aid carried its own vulnerabilities. They learned of the substance she relied upon, a powerful drug that had ensnared her in its grip. Her dependence on it was both a weakness and a secret, leaving her exposed to forces eager to exploit her. Jocelyn and Vaughn recognized that this was both her greatest danger and her greatest escape. If they could control the knowledge and possession of the formula, they could not only protect themselves but perhaps secure Britt's future as well. Driven by both necessity and strategy, they made the daring decision to steal the formula. It was not an act of betrayal but one of foresight, a calculated risk born from gratitude and survival. They believed that by seizing control of the drug's creation, they could prevent Britt from falling deeper into her dependency and give her a way to eventually free herself from those who held sway over her. This act was reckless and dangerous, but it was also guided by an unspoken loyalty to the woman who had risked everything to save them. For Britt, the theft would eventually be a turning point. Though she did not know it yet, Jocelyn and Vaughn's actions laid the groundwork for her liberation from the chains of addiction and control. By cutting off the source that others could use to manipulate her, she would one day find the strength to reclaim her autonomy. The future, uncertain as it was, now carried the faint possibility of redemption and freedom for her as well. In this shared act of survival, their fates became intertwined, each dependent on the courage and sacrifices of the others. Yet beneath this alliance, a darker truth lingered. Jocelyn and Vaughn harbored a secret so dangerous it could shatter the fragile trust binding them to Britt. They were not ordinary captives nor simple survivors, they were members of the WSB. This allegiance meant that every action they took carried implications for greater than personal survival. Their hidden identities were a double-edged sword, granting them the training to endure captivity and orchestrate daring moves, but also placing them under an oath of silence that forbade them from revealing the full scope of their mission. The weight of this secret pressed heavily upon them as they stepped into their new reality. They owed their lives to Britt, yet they also owed their loyalty to an organization built on secrecy and manipulation. Jocelyn and Vaughn walked a fragile line between gratitude and deception, knowing that revealing the truth could destroy the fragile bond with Britt, but also knowing that hiding it might one day put her in even greater danger. It was this delicate balance of freedom and captivity, of loyalty and betrayal that would define the path ahead, a path where survival was never guaranteed, but where trust, secrets, and stolen formulas would shape their intertwined destinies. Second, Jason had always been known as a man of few words and even fewer visible emotions, the type who rarely allowed himself to be caught off guard. Yet on this day, something managed to pierce through his hardened exterior. He had already been burdened with the devastating shock of Drew's shooting, an act that left him restless and on edge, desperate for answers about the person responsible. The weight of uncertainty gnawed at him, each lead and each unanswered question pushing him further into a spiral of suspicion. Jason, usually steady and calm, found himself struggling to contain the storm brewing beneath his surface. As he replayed the incident in his mind, Jason's thoughts were consumed by the search for the shooter. The betrayal felt deeply personal, and the possibility that Drew had been targeted for reasons tied to their shared past made the wound all the more painful. Jason needed clarity, but clarity refused to come. Instead, the silence surrounding the attack created room for paranoia, where every detail seemed like a potential clue and every ally could be a hidden enemy. He tried to focus on evidence, but his emotions clouded the sharp instincts he relied on so often. It was in this vulnerable state that Vaughn and Jocelyn stepped forward with news that left Jason reeling once again. They revealed that they had found a cure for Britt, a revelation so sudden and improbable that it shook Jason's already fragile composure. The thought that Britt, whose struggles had long been intertwined with his own sense of loyalty and guilt, might finally have a chance at salvation should have been cause for relief. Yet Jason could not shake the unease that crept in the moment they spoke the words. Relief was tainted by suspicion, and instead of gratitude, he felt the heavy pull of doubt. What troubled Jason most was not just the miraculous nature of their claim, but the question of how Vaughn and Jocelyn came to possess such knowledge. The cure was no ordinary discovery. It suggested access to networks and resources far beyond what ordinary people could reach. Jason, hardened by years of navigating secrets, conspiracies, and betrayals, immediately sensed that something was being withheld from him. Vaughn and Jocelyn's sudden role in this mystery did not align with the people he thought he knew them to be, and that dissonance set every instinct he had on high alert. Jason's suspicions deepened as he studied their demeanor. They seemed too composed, too guarded, as though they were hiding more than they were willing to admit. His mind raced through the possibilities, each darker than the last. Were they being manipulated? Were they working for someone else? Or worse, were they part of a larger scheme designed to control not only Britt but him as well? The timing was too precise, the details too perfect, and Jason could not allow himself to ignore the gnawing voice in his head warning him of danger. The possibility that Vaughn and Jocelyn were connected to the WSB struck Jason like a lightning bolt. If true, it would explain their access to the cure, but it would also unravel everything he thought he understood about their loyalty and purpose. The WSB was not an organization that tolerated loose ends, and if their involvement came to light, the consequences would be catastrophic. Jason knew from experience that secrets tied to the agency often carried costs that reached far beyond those directly involved, pulling families, allies, and entire communities into the crossfire. The more he considered the implications, the heavier the burden became. Jason realized that if the truth about Vaughn and Jocelyn's ties to the WSB were exposed, it would not only compromise them but also threaten to destabilize everything he had been fighting to protect. Britt's fate, Drew's recovery, and even his own standing in Port Charles could all be jeopardized in an instant. The cure, once seen as a beacon of hope, now loomed like a double-edged sword capable of saving lives but also capable of triggering chaos if placed in the wrong hands. Jason stood at a crossroads, torn between trust and suspicion. He could not deny the potential good that Vaughn and Jocelyn's discovery might bring, yet he also could not ignore the shadows surrounding their story. The answers he sought about Drew's shooter were now tangled with this new mystery, and Jason knew that unraveling one would inevitably lead him deeper into the other. The weight of too many shocking revelations pressed down on him, leaving him with the unsettling realization that the path forward was more dangerous than he could have imagined. Third, Brennan had long mastered the art of subtle manipulation, and in the wake of Drew's shooting, he saw an opportunity to assert his control over the fragile balance of Port Charles. While others reacted with fear, confusion, and grief, Brennan carefully positioned himself as a shadowy presence behind the scenes, steering events with an invisible hand. His target was Anna, the woman who posed the greatest threat to exposing the truths he had worked so hard to bury. With precision, he studied her moves, anticipated her strategies, and prepared ways to twist her instincts against her, ensuring that her pursuit of justice would lead only into carefully constructed dead ends. Anna, fiercely determined to uncover the shooter's identity, found herself constantly running into barriers that made no logical sense. Witnesses who once seemed eager to speak suddenly retracted their statements, crucial evidence inexplicably disappeared, and new leads would often collapse into contradictions. Every step forward was met with 2 steps back, and though she refused to admit it openly, Anna began to feel the invisible weight of someone working against her. Unbeknownst to her, Brennan was orchestrating these obstacles with calculated precision, tightening the web around her so she would waste valuable time chasing shadows instead of reaching the truth. The more Anna pressed forward, the more Brennan escalated his interference. He spread false rumors through discreet channels, ensuring that misinformation seeped into the case at every turn. He planted seeds of doubt in those closest to her, whispering suspicions that undermined her credibility. Even the most loyal allies began to question whether Anna's instincts were guiding her in the right direction. Brennan understood that once trust was fractured, even the strongest investigator could falter, and his manipulations began to carve deep fractures into the foundation of her pursuit. Behind closed doors, Brennan maintained a facade of detachment, as though he weren't involved in the chaos consuming Anna's investigation. In reality, he was monitoring every detail, from police reports to private conversations. With his access to sensitive information, he could dismantle Anna's progress before she even realized she had made it. This constant interference left her circling the same dead ends, exhausted and frustrated. Brennan thrived on this control, his satisfaction growing each time he watched her get tangled deeper in a maze he had designed to ensure her failure. What made Brennan's manipulation particularly dangerous was his knowledge of the truth. Unlike Anna, who struggled to piece together fragments of evidence, Brennan already knew the identity of the real shooter. This knowledge gave him a chilling advantage. He was not merely obstructing an investigation, but deliberately concealing a crime. By controlling the flow of information, he was able to protect the killer from discovery while simultaneously shaping the narrative to keep suspicion away from himself. For Brennan, truth was not a matter of morality but of power, and so long as he held it, he held control over everyone else. Anna's instincts screamed that she was being misled, yet she could not pinpoint how or by whom. Every time she neared a breakthrough, the ground shifted beneath her, forcing her to start again. She began to sense patterns that suggested someone was orchestrating her failures, but without concrete proof, suspicion was all she had. Her resolve only deepened, but so did her frustration. For Brennan, this was the ideal scenario, Anna burning her energy in pursuit of ghosts, while the real danger remained shrouded in silence. The deeper the investigation went, the more dangerous Brennan's interference became. His manipulations weren't limited to paperwork or whispers. He was willing to endanger lives if it meant protecting the secret. Potential witnesses disappeared, either fleeing under duress or silenced permanently. Leads that could have pointed directly to the truth were scrubbed so thoroughly they may as well have never existed. Brennan's meticulous cover-up made it nearly impossible for Anna to distinguish reality from deception, leaving her vulnerable to making mistakes that could cost her everything. In the end, Brennan's power lay not in brute force but in his ability to stay unseen while pulling every string. He thrived in the shadows, content to let others stumble blindly while he dictated the rhythm of their steps. For Anna, the battle was no longer just about finding Drew's shooter, it was about untangling herself from Brennan's grip before it was too late. What she didn't yet realize was that Brennan wasn't just concealing the killer, he was protecting something even larger, a web of secrets that threatened to engulf not just her investigation, but the entire city of Port Charles. Fourth, Michael had never expected to stumble upon information that could change the way he viewed everything unfolding around him. But fate had a strange way of delivering revelations when he least anticipated them. After his confrontation with Drew, an act driven by frustration and the growing realization that Drew had become a dangerous force of disruption, Michael found himself uncovering documents and patterns that painted a far darker picture than he had imagined. These files, meticulously hidden and scattered through different channels, revealed the possibility of a grand scheme Drew had been constructing. One that reached far beyond personal vendettas and into a web of chaos designed to harm everyone connected to him. The deeper Michael dug, the clearer the threads became. Drew had not been acting impulsively or out of blind anger. His actions had the mark of long-term calculation, suggesting that the chaos in Port Charles was no accident. Michael realized that each conflict, each fracture within families, and each crisis that had recently erupted bore Drew's fingerprints. What had once seemed like coincidence now read as orchestration, a deliberate pattern designed to destabilize the community from within. For Michael, this discovery was more chilling than the confrontation itself, for it meant that Drew's reach had already extended further than anyone had dared to consider. Among the most disturbing revelations was the role Willow had unknowingly played. Michael's heart ached as he pieced together evidence suggesting Drew had manipulated circumstances around his wife, making her a pawn in a much larger strategy. What made the situation unbearable was that Drew's schemes did not stop at Willow. They extended to Michael's own daughter, intertwining his family in the treacherous design. It became clear to Michael that the people he loved most had been endangered not by random chance but by Drew's deliberate interference. Every choice Willow thought she had made freely may have been carefully guided by Drew's manipulations. Michael could not ignore the rage and fear that surged through him as he processed these findings. Drew's betrayal cut deeper than any personal rivalry. It was a direct assault on his family's safety and future. The thought that his daughter had been included in Drew's machinations filled Michael with a cold fury. His protective instincts, always fierce, became unshakable as he vowed to shield Willow and their child from whatever remnants of Drew's plan might still be in motion. Yet this vow came with a heavy burden. Silence was not an option, but revealing the truth could unravel everything. As Michael continued to trace the evidence, he found the list of targets expanding. Stella, Curtis, Porty, each of them had been marked in one way or another within Drew's plot. The documentation suggested tailored strategies aimed at exploiting their weaknesses and turning their strengths into vulnerabilities. Stella's influence within the family, Curtis's leadership, Portia's medical expertise all were points Drew sought to destabilize. Knowing that chaos would ripple outward through the people who trusted them, Michael realized that this was not just about individual grudges but about dismantling the fabric of the community itself. The enormity of the conspiracy left Michael grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt vindicated for having taken action against Drew, believing he had removed a dangerous threat. On the other, he was haunted by the knowledge that Drew's schemes were larger than one person could stop. The idea that so many lives had been endangered made him question whether he had acted soon enough, or whether the damage Drew had set in motion was already irreversible. Each new piece of evidence left him with more questions than answers, deepening the sense that he was now standing at the edge of something catastrophic. What made the discovery more unnerving was the possibility that Drew had not been working alone. Michael began to consider whether there were silent accomplices, people close to them all who had aided Drew in weaving his plot. Trust became a fragile commodity, and suspicion crept into every corner of Michael's mind. The realization that allies could have been compromised only intensified his sense of urgency, for it meant that the danger was not yet neutralized, yet it was merely hidden, waiting to strike again when least expected. Michael knew he could not reveal the truth recklessly. To expose Drew's plots to openly risked sparking panic and further destabilization, the very outcome Drew had intended. Instead, he resolved to move carefully, gathering more evidence and finding a way to dismantle the remnants of Drew's plan without allowing others to fall victim to its traps. His role was no longer just as a protector of his family, but as a guardian of the larger circle of lives Drew had targeted. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but he accepted it as the cost of uncovering the truth. In the end, Michael's discovery was both a curse and a calling. He could no longer see Drew as a misguided ally or even as a personal rival, had to acknowledge him as the architect of a devastating network of betrayal. The revelations left Michael deeply unsettled but also resolute, determined to ensure that Drew's manipulations would no longer succeed in harming those he loved. The battle ahead would be silent, shadowed, and fraught with risk, but Michael understood that he had been given no choice. He now held the knowledge of Drew's true nature, and with it, the burden of ensuring that the chaos Drew unleashed would finally come to an end. Finally, Alexis had always prided herself on her ability to remain composed under pressure, but nothing could have prepared her for the discovery that left her on the verge of speechlessness. The chaos surrounding Drew's shooting had already shaken the foundations of Port Charles, yet as she pushed herself deeper into the search for truth, Alexis stumbled upon something she could not ignore. While rushing to gather evidence and, at the same time, ensuring Scout's safety by ushering the young girl away from the house that had become a scene of blood and violence, She noticed details others had overlooked. These traces were faint but undeniable, threads that, when pieced together, pointed to one person she never thought she would have to suspect: Michelle. The realization hit her like a blow. At first, Alexis tried to convince herself that she was mistaken, that her mind had simply latched onto the wrong conclusion in a moment of panic. Yet as she examined the evidence more closely, footprints, the inconsistencies in the timeline, and the subtle remnants of his presence at the scene, her doubts grew into something far darker. Michael's name kept surfacing in her thoughts, an idea too dangerous to dismiss, but too horrifying to fully embrace. The thought that he, of all people, might be entangled in Drew's shooting unsettled Alexis to her core. Her first instinct was fear. Not fear for herself, but fear of what the truth would mean for everyone around her. Michael was not just any man, he was the son of a powerful family, a figure deeply woven into the lives of those closest to Drew. If Alexis's suspicions proved true, the fallout would be catastrophic. Families would fracture, alliances would crumble, and the fragile trust holding their world together would collapse into ruin. As she held Scout close, Alexis felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She was holding a secret that could either save lives or destroy them. Complicating matters further was the condition of Drew himself. His survival hung by a thread, and every second brought news of his worsening state. Alexis could not ignore the possibility that Drew might never wake to give his own account of what happened. That uncertainty intensified her dread, for if Drew died, the truth would be buried with him, leaving her suspicions about Michael as the only fragile line of defense against the lies and manipulations that were bound to follow. She knew she had to tread carefully, for one wrong move could irreparably damage not only Michael's life but also Scout's future. The conflict raging within Alexis grew unbearable. She had built her reputation on integrity, on being willing to confront hard truths no matter the cost. Yet this discovery placed her in a moral quagmire unlike any she had faced before. If she pursued her suspicions openly, she risked unleashing chaos that could tear families apart. If she remained silent, she would become complicit in hiding the truth, even if it meant allowing a potential perpetrator to walk free. Alexis found herself paralyzed between these choices, her instincts warring with her emotions. Adding to her torment was the haunting image of Michael himself. She remembered the man who had fought so hard to protect his family, who had stood against countless threats with fierce determination. Could that same man be capable of orchestrating the attack on Drew? The question left her unsettled, for Michael's loyalty to Willa and his daughter was unquestionable, but desperation had driven good people to terrible acts before. The more Alexis thought about it, the more she feared that Michael's motives could have been rooted not in cruelty but in a misguided attempt to protect the ones he loved. Despite her dread, Alexis knew she could not ignore the evidence. Each clue was like a voice demanding her attention, pushing her closer to acknowledging the unthinkable. She began quietly cataloging what she had found, knowing she might one day need to present it, either to confront Michael directly or to protect Scout from the potential consequences of being tied to such a devastating crime. Her hands trembled as she worked, not from fear of exposure, but from the gravity of holding a truth so volatile it could alter the course of everything. As Alexis wrestled with her suspicions, she felt an increasing sense of isolation. She could not confide in anyone without risking exposure, nor could she share her fears without putting Scout in greater danger. The silence became a prison, and within it, her anxiety grew sharper by the hour. Every time she looked at Scout, she was reminded of the innocence at stake, the fragile line between safety and destruction that her decisions now balanced upon. Alexis realized that her discovery was not just about Drew or Michael, it was about the lives of everyone who would inevitably be caught in the ripple of what came next. In the end, Alexis understood that the path forward would demand both courage and restraint. She could not rush into accusations, nor could she allow herself to remain frozen by fear. Michael's potential involvement in Drew's shooting was a possibility she could neither confirm nor dismiss, but the danger it represented was undeniable. As she carried Scout to safety and glanced back at the house that had become a crucible of secrets, Alexis knew that her next steps would decide more than just the fate of one man. They would determine the survival of trust, loyalty, and truth in a world already hanging on by a thread.